Hello, welcome to the Pitcher Nail Down. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mail. We got Sports 25 to life. Talking about tonight's action, 7 games on tap, and of course that means 14 pitchers. Some good options, some bad options, and then some options that you could do without. You can give or take some of these guys. You don't really care about some. A lot of really average pitchers on the slate tonight, but we'll go ahead and start things off at the top. Clayton Kershaw, 12,700 on DraftKings, 12,100 on FanDuel. Minus 180 favorite, no surprise there, at Chicago. But a 9-run total. They're saying there's a 60% chance of showers and storms. The wind is gusty and blowing out to center. You don't like those things. But then you look a little bit deeper, you see that Cubs still have a team total of just 3.5. And that 9-run total becomes a lot less intimidating because, like Josh and I were saying in an earlier podcast, it doesn't matter how hard the wind is blowing. If you don't hit the ball, it's not going to go over the fence.
Yep. And I mean, this feels like a probably 12-15 strikeout game for Kershaw pretty easily. I mean, he's been doing it basically every game. I think he's got 10-plus strikeouts in, 4 of the last 5, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, he's no Chris Sale, but he's working on it.
Yeah, I mean, he's been great. The Cubs strike out a decent amount. You mentioned the wind's blowing out, but, I mean, we've seen plenty of wind blowing out games with worse pitchers on the mound not put up the run totals
not even close a couple times.
You think they're going to, right. So I'm not going to run away from Kershaw just because of that. There's a better chance I run away from him because of his price today, if anything.
Yeah.
Especially with a couple of these other really, really solid matchups out there that I'm sure we're going to get to here in a second. I think he's easily the best GPP play of the day because his ownership is going to be much lower than it should be, both because of the win, the run total, all that stuff. It's going to drive his ownership down, not to mention the price. So I think there's some upside there as far as like the ownership percentage goes, where he might be 50% less owned than he usually is in this kind of situation. He's still a massive favorite. I mean, he's a huge favorite for 10-plus strikeouts in this game. The Cubs' offense hasn't been great, and they've been striking out a lot. So, I mean, there's a lot to like here, and a couple things that kind of scare you away. And if that drives the ownership percentage down, he's going to be a guy I use quite a bit.
Yeah, and ultimately, I mean, there's really no one that has the ceiling that he has, especially against a free-swinging Cubs team. So,
yep.
A guy, I mean, I understand you being on the fence at cash games, but GBPs, like you said, he's got to be an elite option there. Next up, Felix Hernandez. He's $11,600 on FanDuel, $10,900 on DraftKings. So, a significant price decrease on DraftKings from Kershaw, opposed to on the other end on FanDuel. And he's a minus 155 favorite, but what you like the most about this is 6.5 run total, full run lower than any other game, opposed by Joe Blanton. That right there tells you, and he's a decent size favorite, minus 155. That's telling you that Seattle's supposed to score some runs, but Kansas City's not supposed to score a lot. But then again, Kansas City's a team that you don't like to target with pitchers for the most part.
Right.
I know I don't, because they put the ball in play a lot, don't strike out very much at all. Due to his price tag, I mean, I think he makes for more of a GPP play to me tonight. But if you decide to roll him in cash, I don't blame you. That is a really low total, low team total on the other side, too. So what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. I feel a little bit better about him in cash, but he's a guy I've been using a lot in the same situation. We talked about before the show that Kershaw and Felix have been on the same slate a ton. Felix has obviously been a little bit more up and down, which is probably what has a lot of people leaning towards him more as a GPP play. It's going to keep his ownership percentage down, probably below Kershaw's, which is always a good thing in GPPs if he's not the most owned pitcher. Like you said, I mean, there's really nothing that should scare you in this game outside of the fact that he probably has a little bit less strikeout upside than he usually does, because Kansas City's strikeout rate is like 18.6%, I believe, last time I looked. Against righties, it's a little bit higher against lefties. But, I mean, it's still Felix. I think he'll get his strikeouts. Probably not a massive strikeout game like we're hoping for from Kershaw tonight, but he could rack up 7 or 8 in 8 innings pretty easily here and give up almost no runs. So I think this is a really strong play in really any format you want. For me tonight, with these two and then the third pitcher is Pineda for me. At least on FanDuel, I'll be constructing my hitting lineup and then kind of seeing what pitchers fit with it, especially in GPPs. In cash games, I might look a little bit harder and try to pick out the guy that I really like, although I really like all three of these guys, to be honest. So it's going to be about a fit thing for me more than anything on a smaller slate where you don't have quite as many value hitting options and guys like that. And there's guys that tend to be more like almost must-play hitters because of the short slate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said about Pineda, I mean, he's cheaper than these other guys, significantly so. And he's a huge favorite, minus 280, 8.5 run total. He's got that kind of number that you usually see with Clayton Kershaw as far as being the big favorite of the night. So obviously factors going better in his favor. Small park, and he's been very good, but he hasn't been great against lefties. 323 WOBA allowed. That's really the only thing that concerns you. But this is still the worst offense in the league against right-handed pitching. And Pineda, 25.8% strikeout rate, 51.3% ground ball rate, just a 3.3% walk rate, which is by far the lowest of any of these qualified pitchers tonight. So, I mean, he's in a great spot tonight, and I really don't mind him, like you said, cash games, GVPs, any of the above, because, I mean, it's a great matchup for him.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a nice discount on both sites. I mean, he's $1,500 cheaper than Hernandez, a full $2,000 cheaper than Pineda on FanDuel. On DraftKings, really similar. He's, what is that?
He's $3,400 less than Kershaw on DraftKings.
And $1,600 less than Hernandez. So, I mean, that's a big savings, especially being that it's a two-pitcher site. Hernandez and Pineda might be a great cash game play today because if you go Kershaw, you're going to have a really hard time fitting hitters if you go with another one of those pitchers at the top. And after those three guys, we're going to talk about this here in a second, but like you said, there's not a lot pitching-wise on this slate to really like. There's a couple small favorites, but even those guys are in pretty high run total games, and they're not big strikeout guys, so it gets really iffy after that. And so if you're looking at DraftKings and you want to have two rock-solid pitchers for a cash game, it's going to be really hard to afford Kershaw and another one of these top three. But you can do a little something with a Hernandez-Pineda combination there. Leaves you about $30,000 for the rest of your hitters, and you can do something with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first guy of this bunch that we were mentioning is Trevor Bauer. He's a minus 140 favorite at home against Detroit. 9-run total, though. Wind blowing out here as well. Seemingly the wind blowing out everywhere. And he's $8,700 on FanDuel. Much cheaper on DraftKings at $7,500. But with the wind blowing out, obviously a ton of power hitters here. A little bit of a park bump going to Cleveland from Detroit. I mean, this is a guy who's been really good, and he's also been really bad. He was great in his last start against the Cubs. Got rocked by Seattle in the start before. JD Martinez hit 3 homers last night. You got Victor Martinez back in this lineup. He homered as well. He's starting to hit. Trevor Bauer is a GPP option only for me, and he's a pretty risky one at that.
Yeah, that's the way I feel about it, too. I mean, I just don't like playing guys against Detroit. I know that they're not like a massive like powerhouse team that just goes out and scores 6-7 runs every night, but they can do that every night. And that's what always scares me because, I mean, he's at $7,500 on DraftKings. I believe he's a little bit more expensive on FanDuel, right? 8,700. I mean, the 75 I can kind of get behind. You can see it's adjusted a little bit for the fact that he's facing Detroit, but I mean, even as a favorite there, I'm just not really excited about it. Cleveland has been better offensively lately, but they've been much better against righties, and even that hasn't been like really impressive. They have had some of these guys in the middle of their order still struggling quite a bit. So I just don't trust the run support there all that much. That's one of the big things for me, but I mean,
the fly ball rate. I mean, 46% fly balls from Trevor Bauer and 11% walk rate. That right there tells you if he's wild, like we've seen a couple times, put a couple guys on base, any of these guys, really, top to bottom for Detroit, make one mistake to him, that could be 3 runs on the board quick.
Yeah, I mean, he could easily lose this game 3-0 is the thing, too. I mean, Ryan's not a great pitcher for Detroit, but as a lefty facing a Cleveland team that's full of lefties, I mean, you basically only have Ryan Rayburn that's really a lot stronger against lefties than righties. They don't really have anyone else that they bring into that lineup when they face a lefty.
Yeah.
Obviously, like Carlos Santana is a switch hitter, but he's a switch hitter that I think is better from the left side. He has a little bit more power from the right side, but he hasn't been hitting many home runs in general.
Yeah, and I mean, Michael Brantley's got good numbers against lefties, but he's still a lefty-lefty matchup.
Yeah.
So, like you said, not a lot going in Cleveland's favor there. He is a small favorite, but it's also tied for the biggest total on the night. Very risky. I'll probably throw him in 1 GPP tonight, but that's going to be about it for me with Trevor Bauer.
Yeah, my most likely used guy in that price range is going to be Drew Hutchison.
Yep.
He's a minus 124 favorite, I believe, here, facing Tampa Bay. At Tampa Bay in a pitcher's park. He hasn't been like really good, but he has those games where he looks really good, and then he has games where he looks really bad. But he's been a pretty good matchup play over the last like 6 or 8 starts. If you just avoid the tough teams, he was pretty good against the Mets, pretty good against Houston, pretty good against the White Sox, pretty good against the Angels that you would expect. He's struggled a little bit against Boston the last 2 times he's faced them. Wasn't great against Minnesota. Which was kind of frustrating because that was a game I know a lot of people used him, and it's kept his ownership percentage down quite a bit since then, despite him having 2 really strong games out of the last 3. So he's a guy that I like in GPPs. He's probably, unfortunately, going to be my secondary cash game play if I'm not playing 2 of those top 3 guys. But I don't feel great about it. I'm really going to try and spend on pitcher if I can today.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a Tampa Bay offense that's near the bottom of the league against righties, so Hutchison, like you said, I mean, he's a volatile option at times, but I mean, he's got the stuff. It's just whether or not he has it going that night. So more often than not, he's been a fine pitcher, and he's not that expensive. So I think he's a fine option, especially as a secondary guy, like you said on DraftKings. So not a guy that I mind. Next up, Hector Santiago, $7,200 on DraftKings, $7,500 on FanDuel, and this game does only have a 7.5 run total. So obviously Vegas has a little bit of faith in these pitchers here, but I mean, this is a guy that does not pitch deep. You look at his last 4 games, 5 2/3, 3 2/3, 5. I mean, he's got upside, but I mean, his best game of the season was against Detroit, where he struck out 7 and 7 1/3 inning. We know they strike out a ton against lefties, but then again, this is also a Houston team that strikes out a ton against lefties, but also has a lot of power against lefties. So, I mean, you got both extreme sides of the spectrum here, where you could see Hector Santiago getting rocked, giving up a bunch of home runs, but you could also see him getting a bunch of strikeouts. And what's really concerning to you there is a 52.4% fly ball rate. I mean, one of the worst in the major leagues. Obviously, 1.33 home runs per 9, kind of a product of that. So this is a guy it's really risky tonight. But I mean, even if he gives up 3-4 runs, if he gets to 7-8 Ks, it might not be too bad of a GVP option.
Yeah, it's a really interesting matchup because it's a guy that is a pretty decent strikeout pitcher against a team that strikes out a lot, but he's also a guy that gives up a ton of fly balls against a team that hits a ton of fly balls.
Yep.
And so, I mean, like you said, you can see that going either way. He could give up 3-4 home runs tonight pretty easily, or he could strike out 8-9 guys in 6 innings tonight pretty easily too. So he's probably my favorite GPP play in there. I think he's got a little bit more upside than Hutchison tonight just because Tampa Bay doesn't strike out a ton. So I'm probably going to use Hutchison as a cash game play in this range. Santiago is my GPP play in this range.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. Right below him, Tsuyoshi Wada, $6,700 on FanDuel, $6,700 also on DraftKings. Opposing Clayton Kershaw, Dodgers have a 5-run total. Yes, he pitched well last time out, but it was a lefty against Cleveland, not a lefty against the Dodgers. And yes, the Dodgers are much better against righties, best in the league against righties, in fact, and near the bottom against lefties, but 5-run team total, wind blowing out. There's not a chance I'll be playing this guy against the Dodgers tonight.
No, I don't think I can either, especially with a guy I know you like, Tommy Malone, priced a little bit cheaper than him, I believe, on both sites. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Malone's just cheaper than him on both sites. That's a guy I greatly prefer in this price range.
Yeah, so we'll just go ahead and move on over to him. Tommy Malone, $6,000 on DraftKings, $65 on FanDuel. He's been great over his last 2 starts. You look at his numbers, 7 innings pitched each game against St. Louis and Texas, 8 total hits, 1 walk, 13 Ks, got a win in one of those games. And, this is a guy that he's been volatile at times, but if you take into account the matchup here, where you've got, a White Sox team that's facing a left-handed pitcher, we saw Jeff Locke get to this team last week and have a great game. And, I mean, Jeff Locke is not a very good pitcher. I think Tommy Malone's a better pitcher than Jeff Locke. But if you look at the numbers here for the White Sox, not only are they the worst in the league against left-handed pitching, but they are by far the worst. 23.9% strikeout rate, 240 team WOBA, 45 WRC+, .077 ISO. I mean, get any left-hander the ball on the mound, and I'll play them against the White Sox. And I think Tommy Malone actually has the talent and the skills to actually have a really nice game. So he's my favorite value tournament option of the night tonight.
Yeah, mine too. That's the way I'm going also. I mean, there's a couple guys in the really cheap range that are okay here. A couple that are really scary. I think he's my favorite one also.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's not a lot of options around this price point, and I mean that one just makes a lot of sense. He's a minus 143 favorite. It is a 9-run total, so obviously a little bit of concern there. But you're getting a guy at a really cheap price tag, so you're not worried too much about that. His fly ball rate's a little higher, and he'd like to be 41.2, and he does give up a decent amount of home runs. But I mean, who's really going to beat this guy here? You got Jose Abreu to worry about. Then you've got, I mean, the next best hitters after that are lefties. You got Adam Eaton, Adam LaRoche. Really not concerned about many of those guys in lefty-lefty matchups. So.
No, I mean, you got to keep targeting the White Sox until they start scoring some runs because they haven't been scoring any runs.
Absolutely. And speaking of the White Sox, John Danks on the other side, 6,300 on FanDuel and 53 on DraftKings.
Yeah.
He's a lefty facing Minnesota. No thanks for me. This is a Minnesota team that, speaking of how bad the White Sox are against lefties, the Twins are great against lefties.
Yeah.
They just, I mean, they look, if you look on paper, they're about a league average team, it shows. But, I mean, they got some guys in this lineup. You got Brian Dozier, Trevor Plouffe especially. Just those two guys just absolutely crush left-handed pitching. John Danks, not a guy that I have any sort of faith in. I know he's cheap, and I know, but it's a 9-run total, so Vegas expecting some runs, and there's going to be some runs scored, and I think a lot more on the Minnesota side than the White Sox.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, that's definitely a team I'll be looking to target in stacks.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be a popular one tonight. Kyle Ryan, the guy we kind of touched on earlier, $5,600 on FanDuel and
45 on DraftKings.
Yeah, 45. I mean, really cheap. You mentioned him earlier, so I'm guessing that if you're going really cheap, I know you like to do that in tournaments. Is Kyle Ryan your really cheap target tonight?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, against Cleveland, lefties have just shut him down a lot. And we talked about Rayburn's really the only guy that scares you a ton. I mean, Santana is a switch hitter, has some power from the right side, but he's only hitting about 210, I think, from the right side of the plate this year with a couple home runs. And so he's not really, like, terrifying me or anything. Ryan's not the favorite here, but I think it's more of a pick-em than this number shows. With a pretty high run total in that game of 9, I think Detroit could easily win that game. And even if it's a game where it's like they win 5-4 and he gives up 3 of the runs, he pitches 5 or 6 innings, gets a few strikeouts. I mean, he's going to provide some value on that 4,500 price tag on DraftKings at least. I think he's a great guy to pair with Kershaw to try and get some hitters in your lineup today.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, he could pitch pretty poorly, still pick up the win,
right,
and pay off that easily pay that off. And just to further his point and the White Sox point, he faced the White Sox at U.S. Cellular 3 starts ago, went 7 innings, gave up 3 hits and 2 earned runs with 4 Ks. So, and this is not a very good pitcher in Kyle Ryan. So, I mean, he's about average right now. So just imagine what he's going to be capable of doing tonight against the Indians and vice versa there with John Danks. So keep that in mind. A couple other guys to mention. Kevin Correa at the Yankees, no thanks. You got any Kevin Correa love for us?
No, I can't say that I do.
I didn't think you would.
And I don't want to throw any weak righties against the Yankees at Yankee Stadium. It's just not for me.
No, not at all. Here's one who may be an interesting option. Brett Oberholtzer. He's $5,200 on FanDuel, $6,500 on DraftKings. Kind of opposite there, where he's a little bit expensive. And facing the Angels team that's 22nd in the league against left-handed pitching. You've got Albert Pujols and you've got Mike Trout, who are both hitting the ball well. Yep. Obviously, Eric Ibar's got to hit lefties, but Brett Oberholtzer is a lefty that we like to pick on a lot. But he's actually having, I mean, he's only pitched 26 innings this season, but actually pitched pretty well. Never going to be a big strikeout guy. But, I mean, pitched well in Coors Field, had a great game at home against Seattle. I mean, obviously struggled at Toronto, but that's to be expected. So this is a guy that I think actually has a little bit of upside as like a single bullet type of GPP play tonight.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I think you can do a lot worse than him on today's slate for probably more money. So I have no problem with him. I think he's a pretty solid play, honestly. Not a guy I'm going to go look at in cash games or anything like that. But like you said, if he can get through Pujols and Trout, there's not a lot else you need to be scared of in that Angels lineup. You mentioned Ibar. I mean, the guy's got, like 3 extra base hits on the season or something like that. Yeah, he's having a decent batting average year, but I mean, he's not a guy that is ever really getting past first base on any of his hits. So,
exactly.
Not a guy that scares you very much. Obviously, Trout, and especially right now, Pujols is just red hot. Those guys are both scary, but once you get through that, I mean, a lot of their other players are left-handed bats that don't hit lefties really well. So I think he's a fine GPP play today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, 26 and a third innings pitched this year, 50% ground ball rate, hasn't allowed a home run yet. Wouldn't be surprised if that number changes tonight. But either way, at his price, I don't think he's a bad option. Right below him, Matt Andriese, $5,200. Gets Toronto and Tampa Bay. I mean, he pitched well last time out against Washington. Obviously, he didn't get the start. He came in the third inning. Pitched really well during that span. 4 innings, 2 Ks, 2 hits, 1 walk. Got the win in that one, actually. Got the win against the White Sox the time before. So, not a guy I'm really looking at because he doesn't strike out many batters. 15% on the year. But 30 and a third innings pitched, 55% ground ball rate. You got to like that. But then again, I mean, this is a Toronto team that we know crushes left-handed pitching. They hit righties well now, too. So, I think a lot more risk than reward in playing him tonight.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
All right, and then Joe Blanton. No.
You're not a Joe Blanton fan?
No. I mean, if you got some Joe Blanton love, I mean, he pitched well against Milwaukee, certainly, and this isn't a Seattle team that's necessarily been tearing the cover off the ball right now. But, I mean, just for me, I think your Kyle Ryan is a lefty, or Brett Oberholtzer I prefer. I mean, it is a 6.5 run total, and it is in Seattle, so you like that. But in general, I'm just not a Joe Blanton fan.
No, I'm not really either. And the fact that he was a relief pitcher up until the last game, I mean, there's a reason he only pitched 5 innings last game. It's because his arm's not stretched out. And so you're not getting more than 5, maybe 6 tonight, if anything. You also have to worry about the fact that he's facing Felix Hernandez, who seems pretty likely to get the win there. So you're basically punting the win at that point. I think he could have a fine game like he had last time out. But if you take the win out of that stat line that he had last game, I mean, it's really, really average. 5 innings, 4 strikeouts, 5 hits given up. I mean, 1 earned run is great, but that's not really going to get the job done in a GPP, and he's obviously not safe enough to play in cash games. So there's just nowhere he really fits into your roster construction today. I mean, 4,100 on DraftKings is a stupid low price. There's like 100 batters priced higher than him today.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I just don't see a ton of upside there with the fact that he's not going deep in the game and he's not going to strike out a ton of guys. I mean, you're just hoping to get enough points to get you somewhere, and maybe that's worth it to you in cash games, but I'd rather go Ryan, who has some nice upside for only a couple hundred more.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about him not pitching deep, not having his arm stretched out. I mean, that's a factor that your casual gamer might not see. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a chance he's going to pitch deep even if he pitches well. Like you said, I mean, 6 innings max, and even that might be pushing it. So, really just not a guy that really has much value. If he's facing off against an average pitcher, you could consider him, because like you said, maybe gets the win, but really going to be hard to find a way to get the win here opposing Felix Hernandez.
Yep.
All right, with that, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and check out all of our content at dailyfantasycafe.com.